brightly.
Sorry, the conference is talking at us. So they say, we need to go mobile, but what does that mean? Well, I don't know. Phones, we need to get mobile phones. And that's a good starting point, but there's actually a lot more to mobile. Mobile is really a very nuanced kind of thing. And so we wanted to cover today what some of those finer points were of mobile and really kind of come to understand what the real value is of mobile, because it goes far, far beyond just simply devices. And so some of the common questions that we encounter is, the very basics: should we be using mobile devices? And what's the value there? Is it really worth it? And of course, immediately is, all right, well, mobile devices cost money, as does the data. So how do we manage those data costs and device costs? And we'll get into that today for sure. So how do you really get the most out of it? What practices could you put in place in your organization to really get the most out of mobile? Because as it turns out, mobile is a whole nother game. I mean, it is so exciting what's coming down the pipe in mobile. What we're really looking at is the ability to do what you do best and do way less of the things that you don't like to do around data documentation and all that, but at the same time be, say, 300% better at documenting. There's really exciting value coming down the pipe in mobile. So that's really neat, and we'll go over some of that. So what does going mobile entail, sort of to the previous point of, all right, what do we have to do specifically in terms of not just getting the hardware, but how do we change our organization to align with mobile? Because if you really want to get the most out of it, you can't just buy the devices. There's a little bit more to it than that to really get that value out of it. And the thing that we hear a lot of, and particularly in the manufacturing and also healthcare markets, is how do we secure these devices? I know that a lot of you guys engineer things that are extremely proprietary. We have been to facilities where we're not allowed in buildings, because we're not cleared to go in. The security around manufacturing is huge, and safety and other things. And so how can you kind of manage that stuff? Because that becomes a big sticking point with mobile. All right, so without further ado, let's look at, let's get into the first question here is, what is your biggest challenge to adopting mobile devices? So if you guys go ahead and answer this for us, we'll see the results allegedly pop up on screen here. And that'll help kind of contextualize for us where we focus on the rest of this webinar. So we got 1 for cost, 3 for cost, 2 for training, 1 for security. Come on, what are you betting on, Alexandra? We need to get a pool going.
Well, I don't know.
Based on this, I'm going to have to say cost. Cost is, really the one here.
You know what? We should have probably added time on there too. I'm wondering if people are just, not taking the time out of their day to switch over to mobile devices.
Yeah, that could be training too. Sort of, we could wrap time up into training. Like, how much effort does it take to get onboarded? All right, cool. So I think we'll leave it at that. So the results of that, we got most people were looking at cost, but it's basically an even split between all three. So we'll cover all three of those in sort of equal focus in the rest of this seminar. All right, next one. All right, so some key concepts here. So what does real mobile mean? And we're going to get into that in 1 second. What we got there? Okay. All right, cool. So yeah, real mobile. Focus on core competency is the recipe for success. This is a really critical concept. So your technicians are fixers. They are extremely good at what they do. They can fix anything. I'm guessing documentation is probably not their favorite thing. So let's not fight that. Let's work with that. Let's make that a strength. You're a manufacturer. You're not an IT company. The reality of CMMS is that there is a ton of really, quite frankly, expensive computer architecture that goes into maintaining a CMMS system. And if you take everything in-house, you're signing up for, a lot of dollar signs. There's lots of zeros on that check. So there are ways that we're going to cover in this webinar to keep those costs to a bare minimum. Now, This one is my favorite. A guy named B.J. Fogg, he's a professor in Stanford. He came up with this behavioral model. Basically says that to engage in a behavior, you need motivation, ability, and a trigger. So this concept permeates everything we're going to talk about today. So the basic idea of making things easy so that people do them when prompted. So we'll get into that. And then lastly, and definitely not least important, is data is king. You know, what's the point of all this? Why are any of us here today? If we didn't need data, none of us would care. So we need data. We need to know how we can improve. We need accurate data. We really need everything recorded. What we have heard across the board is that from technicians, particularly when you really talk to your technicians, maybe they'll say 60% of their day is stuff just doing little things that don't even really get recorded, but that's 60% of their day, and that's 60% of your cost. So you got to get that data in there. So data is critically important. All right, jump into, all right, so what is mobile? The prevailing view is that mobile is anything that deals with phones, tablets, wearables. I'll make my first controversial statement of the day. My first controversial statement. I've been awake for more than an hour, so it's probably not my first controversial statement of the day.
So far, so good.
Okay, so that has nothing to do with mobile. I said it. All right. What mobile is really about, it's about mobile computing. Okay, but forget computers. Forget all the technology. A lot of us don't, myself in particular. I am the mobile guy. I'm a huge nerd. But, you know, I like doing what I like to do. Getting back to the idea of core competence, there's stuff that I really enjoy doing, and spending time on a mobile device is maybe not my favorite thing, or spending time on a computer. So I want to just do what I do, all right? So good mobile allows you to be what you are best at. So that's what mobile is about. It's technology that helps you do what you do without getting in your way. It takes all the extra layers of faffery off of what you, the core of what you do, so you can get to that and do more of it. Now, like I said, 100% about physical action. At the end of the day, all of us are talking about physical action. You are making things. It boils down to one thing. It's how much stuff do you pump out the door. That's the physical action that all of us supports. So if you can cut out all the sort of bureaucratic nuttiness around that using technology, well, that's a big win and a huge value add. And these actions can be made better. You can really augment someone, turn them into sort of a Tony Stark, if you will, by having a good mobile application that is with them when you need it and where you need it, and with the least effort augments what you're doing. So whether that's giving really great, insightful directions on how to fix something, or telling somebody where the nearest work order is, or whatever, you can really make an individual much better at their core competency with the selective application of data. So that's what mobile is all about. It's about doing what you do best and getting rid of all the layers of nuttiness. And that means having a computational device of some sort, whether it's a watch or a phone or a tablet or an Internet of Things device or whatever, that is with you when you need it, where you need it. And that's the essence of mobile. All right, B.J. Fogg, my favorite. I've been looking forward to this since we started. So B.J. Fogg basically says that for a person to do something, they have to have adequate motivation and ability. So you can imagine someone who's highly motivated to do something, but it's difficult, they're still going to get it done. Or if they're not really that motivated, but it's really easy, they'll still do it. But if it's not easy and they're not motivated, then they're not going to do it. So you have to be very conscientious of this line where on the right side, the green side of that line, they're going to do something in response to being prompted to do it. On the left side, they're not going to do it. So what we hear fairly frequently, and we're guilty of this ourselves many times over internally, is, okay, well, we want employees to engage in some behavior, some desired behavior. We want them to enter more data or better data or engage with their job function more. So how do we do that? Well, the first idea that invariably gets thrown out is, well, let's motivate them. We'll direct them to do this. It's like, okay, that's a good idea. And what we typically see internally, and I imagine y'all are very much the same, is that for like a week, people are on the ball, and then it wanes and wanes, and then all of a sudden, well, why has it stopped happening? Well, let's maybe tie a bonus structure to it, or inverse of that is let's start, marking people down when they don't do it. It's like, okay, hold on. There's another way, a whole different way of thinking, and that is instead of trying to direct people to do something, you can make it so easy for them that they'll just do it. So you don't even have to instruct them. You don't have to give them training or bonuses or anything like that. You just make it easy. And if you're real good at it, if you've really nailed that, and this is what we strive for in mobile, if you've really nailed it, them doing something will be a byproduct of something that they already do, so that it's actually harder to not do it than it is to do it, if that makes sense. That's where you nail it. That's where your ability actually goes kind of below that line, and it's going to happen. And really good mobile, really, really good mobile, that's what mobile does. So to that point, let's look at where technology lies in that ease of use spectrum. So on our far left, we have the traditional desktop. And you'll see down at the bottom of that screen, we have some little details of things that make people's jobs easy, right? And little green dots indicate that that's a feature that is provided by that device, okay? We see on the far end of the spectrum, we have the desktop computer, which does none of those things. It is just purely a bureaucratic instrument. On the right-hand side of that, we have native mobile on a phone, where all of a sudden we have checked all those dots. So I'll let you examine those at your leisure to see what those kind of value propositions are. But I'll also mention something that gets me really excited, and I didn't put green dots on this one, but I had to put it in the slide because it gets me so excited, is Internet of Things. So the Internet of Things is a whole nother level of easy above and beyond mobile. And it can augment, if you combine Internet of Things and mobile, your life is so easy. You can just do amazing, amazing things with that. And again, there are things where they just happen automatically. So it takes active effort to not do these things, to not engage in behaviors that you want people to engage in. All right, so I'm going to switch gears a little bit. We've talked about making processes easy. So let's talk about what specifically that means for us. And so one of the big things that we encounter and that I think everyone should be conscientious of when they are planning their mobile implementations is how not just what people carry is going to change, but how their life is going to change and how the process and incentives and all that changes. Okay, so let's look at a non-mobile process, and this includes desktop CMS. So even with desktop CMS, there's a heavy use of paper because people need that data, again, back to where they are, when they are. So they bring paper with them, okay? So you have all the printing costs, and somebody has to print the paper, and we'll call that person the coordinator. So everywhere I have been, and I've been quite a number of places, there is some saint who, I have the deepest respect for these people because I could never have the patience to do their job. They manage all of this stuff, all the paper, all the work orders come into them. They decide what to do with them. They enter them into the system. They send out the paper. They get the paper back at the end of the day. They enter the stuff back in, and then they run the reports. And it would absolutely exhaust me within about 5 minutes. So God bless these people. I don't know how they do what they do, but they are amazing people, and I have the deepest respect for them. And in this model, the data, from a data perspective, the technician acts as a relay for that data. They're seeing stuff, they make a note, and they hand the note back to the coordinator, but the coordinator does the inputting. So the coordinator is this person who is the center of the hub, if you imagine. I think that would have been the better way for me to put that on the slide. You always think of things after the fact. So they're like the hub of the wheel, right? Now, the consequence of this is that from the coordinator's perspective, they have little to no time for strategic tasks. and sort of the little things. And the technicians, they're slammed with the documentation process, so they're not going to, it actually will take longer for them to document a lot of the things they did than to actually do it. Say like tightening on a light switch or changing a doorknob or something like that. Literally writing down what they did will take longer than doing it. So a lot of that stuff does not get input. And then comes the telephone game. And we've all played this as children, where you tell somebody something and they tell somebody something, and by the time it gets to the end goal, it's totally different from what it began with. And that corrupts data. And like we said, data is king. We need good data. So how do we get that data? How do we get people to have time to enter in the tasks and make it easy for them to do? Okay, well now enter mobile. So now we have no paper. When a work order comes in, it immediately goes to that person's device with zero lag. So from a manufacturer's perspective, that's nice because you don't have to send a technician back to get the description of a work order or anything like that. You're not having conversations over the phone that don't get conveyed in documentation. It just happens through the proper documentation channels as fast, if not faster, than can be conveyed with a phone call. So that's big. Now all of a sudden the coordinator really changes the role with all of this curation of data happening by the app and the system. Then the coordinator can really be more strategic, and they're really they become a curator and they manage by exception. So we can talk about the analogy of micromanaging versus managing by exception. The coordinator now really manages all this data. They're not the hub of the wheel. They're more like the, I don't want to say the policeman, but they're like the referee, okay? Where when they see something that's out of line, they just correct it. But that's really only, say, 2 to 5% of the time. So that 95% of the time that's now freed up, they're being strategic. They're thinking about, well, we have this one particular piece of equipment, but is that the right piece of equipment for us? Whereas previously they didn't have time to do that. They're thinking, hey, this person's on this team, but maybe if we swap them with somebody on another team, we'd be overall more effective. So they're thinking strategically, and that in and of itself compounds the value of mobile. So that's really important. And so here's some data points, and these are real data points. What we're hearing from our coordinator type people is that they save on average 20 hours a week when the mobile switch happens, because they're not dependent, they're not the hub of that wheel. Data can still happen without them, they just need to keep it on the rails. And then the biggest thing, and this is huge for us, we way underestimated the value here when we initially dug into this, is we're seeing a 300% increase in data entry. I had a client call me up just like almost in tears happy because all of a sudden they have not been able to convey to their boss why they need more resources, because according to their boss, like, well, I'm seeing this amount of stuff getting done and that's not congruent with needing 3 more people. Well, once they went mobile, it showed it's so easy. Our app, for example, you can enter in a work order and mark it complete in under 20 seconds. So with that, now it's so easy, and you can voice narrate. You don't have to actually type. So with all that, all these little jobs started getting entered, and they had a 300% increase in data activity. And just grasp for a second, that's great, but grasp what that means. That means before that happened, 300%, that equates to 75% of what was happening wasn't being recorded. That's 75% wasn't being recorded. That's terrifying when you're trying to budget, right? No wonder their supervisors wouldn't, agree to more funding, because they're not seeing that. They're just seeing the 25%. But all of a sudden, when that 300% came in, they said, oh, I get it now. So they got the budgets they needed, and they were able to say, all right, yeah, let's get more people, let's get more resources. And it was a very happy story. But we're seeing this across the board. All right, data. So the data issues that we see a lot, the value points are, where's the money going? How much should I budget? How do I respond in real time? And are we getting the most out of our assets? Well, if you want to know where the money's going and how much you should budget, then the best way to do that is to get that 300% increase in data entry, so you can really see where stuff is going for real without all the little stuff that normally slips through the cracks not contributing to your data. That's critical. The other interesting thing about that is that you need accuracy of data. If people are skipping things or not entering fields correctly, which is, you'll see that commonly in interfaces where there was a hacked attempt to make a mobile CMMS system, where they took the desktop interface and they just shrunk it down to the size of the phone. I think we've all seen interfaces like this, and we just kind of shake our heads and our blood pressure goes up. Ours isn't, incidentally, like that. So you can't have that, because that encourages people, again, BJ Fogg model, is it easy to enter data correctly? It's not easy to enter data correctly, so it's not going to be entered correctly. But if you have a good mobile app where it's easy to enter data correctly and it kind of sanity checks behind you, which is an important feature of a good mobile app, then you're going to get good data in and you're going to have answers to those questions. Responding in real time, well, with paper, that's hard. Phones, even, that's hard, because if you're the coordinator and you're the central hub and you're getting hit from every direction, you got to lag. You got to, handle maybe 3 phone calls before you get to the most recent one that comes in. You're kind of first in, first out operation. But with a good mobile CMMS system, request comes in and gets right to the person that it needs to get to. So mobile makes that really streamlined, and you get good response times. Now, I don't think we have a few verticals that we serve. I don't know that there's any vertical more, where that is more pressing than manufacturing, where you need to get something done right now, because, you can't accept machine downtime. So that's hugely important if you're a manufacturer and you need, real-time dispatch. You got to go mobile. And then, are we getting the most out of our assets? All right. Well, there's a few aspects to that. Firstly, the data, and we've covered the data. Obviously, if you're getting good data in, you know if you're getting the most out of your assets. And you can start amalgamating best practices, where a technician figures out the best way to fix something, and now you can make that the standard for how something gets fixed, and that gets distributed out by mobile in terms of like the steps to take to do, say, preventative maintenance or something like that. So that's really important. So the other interesting aspect of this is actually the value of what's called a cloud-based solution. So you have server-based installations where you're managing all the IT, and I alluded previously to the cost of managing IT infrastructure is enormous. But there's the cost of that, but there's also a hidden cost, which is you don't get the collective knowledge that comes from a cloud solution. So cloud solutions have the ability, not all of them do it, the good ones do, to amalgamate data and look for kind of best practices and look for ways of sharing the collective knowledge of everyone out to every client. So when you go with a cloud solution, you not only get the cost savings of not having to manage the extremely expensive server infrastructure, but you get the advantage that you get the knowledge of the crowd as well. All right, so what have we covered? We've covered the peer pressure thing, what it means to be really mobile. Should we be using mobile devices? Yeah. Is it worth it? Definitely. What does going mobile entail? We talked about that process. Okay, now let's get into some nitty-gritty about the specifics and kind of barriers to implementing mobile. And we'll start with keeping costs down. So mobile devices are a little expensive, and that becomes a barrier for a lot of people. But there's some really good ways of managing hardware costs. So one of them is just simply stay a device or two behind. There's no harm in that. You don't have to have the latest and greatest to run a lot of these CMMS systems, and certainly not ours. So you can get savings by just not having the latest version, and I'll show you some stats on that on the next slide. You got to have a different way of thinking about your hardware, though. With a lot of clients that we've seen, they'll have computers that are running Windows XP from 1998, and when it comes to mobile, you do have to upgrade on a regular basis. So you need to plan on about a 24 to 36 month upgrade cycle, where you're going to sell or turn in your devices and get new ones. The other thing that you can do to really manage costs is to be critical of whether you really need a data plan or not. If you have people going outside and doing things that are outside of where Wi-Fi can reach, then okay, maybe you need to consider a data plan, but you probably don't need one if you're not doing that. So you can save some money there. And there are really good options for securing wireless networks within facilities and all that, and having dedicated wireless networks and all that kind of thing. So the wireless access isn't a huge issue. And the other neat trick that I've heard of, and this is kind of a little bit of a new one to us, but it's something I'm digging into and I hope to share out more about later, is how to leverage local e-waste recyclers. So this is something that I got introduced to the other day, almost by mistake, as I was dumping a mattress in a dumpster. That e-waste recyclers will take people's mobile phones, refurbish them, and send them back out in the world. So if you have a good connection with a recycler, materials recycler, and most manufacturers have pretty good connections with recyclers, see if you can leverage that to get refurbished devices. So you can get them at almost no cost, as I understand it, if you have a good relationship with the recycler. And if you have government connections, this becomes especially true because a lot of those facilities, the e-waste recycling facilities, are licensed or run by the government, local government. All right, so let's look at some costs, and let's look at why it's important to have that regular 24 to 36 month upgrade schedule. So we're going to take iPhones as a case study. So the iPhone 7 is presumably about to come out, and if the pattern holds true, it'll get released around November of this year. What it's going to cost, who knows? It's not out yet, but we'll find out. The iPhone 6S is currently the top of the line, and the iPhone 4S is sort of the bottom of the line iPhone that's supported by the current, what's called iOS 9 operating system. So this year, an interesting thing is going to happen when iPhone 7 comes out. They're going to release iOS 10. When Apple releases iOS 10, presumably in September, so it's coming up very soon, support for iPhone 4S goes away. So if you have an iPhone 4S, it's not going to like die or turn into a pumpkin and run off, but you're not going to get any more updates on it. And eventually, the apps that are working for that are just going to stop working. So you do have to upgrade. So you can kind of decide where you want to be then in that price range. Excuse me. Excuse me. So if you want to get the latest and greatest, which there's not a whole lot of necessary value add in, unless you need like really fast fingerprint scanning for some reason, you're going to pay like $700 per device. On the flip side of that, if you're willing to upgrade more or less every year as the latest device deprecates, then you can go down to like $114 for an iPhone 5. Now, I'll say the $114, that was like, it took no effort on my part to find the $114. I barely did any shopping. I'm sure you can get them for less. I've heard of people getting them for like $50. So you get a wide range there. And so if you're just a couple devices behind, you can get really good deals on mobile phones. So I actually, with contracts, I have a couple friends who have iPhone 5s with contracts, and they got the iPhone 5s for free, or I think 5S for free. So depending on what your contract is, you may be able to get a lot of those devices for free. So, but just the point being, don't plan on spending a whole lot on a brand new device. That's a good way to keep costs down. All right. Which platform? So I'm actually going to go back. Sorry. So one other thing to note about the managing hardware costs is the idea of bring your own device. I didn't put that on the slide, but I think all of us who have smartphones, we have a proclivity for whatever smartphone we have. We picked it for a reason. And a lot of employers are uncomfortable with the idea of allowing employees to use their personal devices at work for the obvious reasons. However, and we'll get into this in a little bit, there are some ways to do that very securely and properly. So we do have clients who do not invest at all in their own hardware. They let their employees get whatever phone they're going to get, but then they allow their employee to use the phone at work. So that cuts the hardware cost way down. So I just had to mention that. And we'll get into how you do that a little bit later. Okay, so platform. So this is the other question that we run into a lot, and this is a very interesting one. So operating systems. There are 4 major mobile operating systems out there right now. We have Windows, Amazon, Android, and iOS. So where do those stand? Well, I'll get back to iOS and Android because there's a lot to be said on that, but let's take a look at Amazon Fire. Amazon Fire is a really interesting operating system that's based on Android, and it has some features that are going to be potentially groundbreaking, but they're not quite there yet, and the availability of devices is not quite there. That said, a few people have gotten Amazon Fire devices for brand new ones, mind you, for like $50, because Amazon, as I understand it, is subsidizing the price of hardware. So there's some interesting stuff going on there, but we don't support them yet because they haven't quite matured to the point where CMMS providers like us can really leverage them heavily. So we're tentatively excited about what they're going to have to offer, and we're going to watch that closely, but it's not quite there yet. Windows. Got to be as nice as I can be on this one. Windows has made a valiant attempt with Windows 10 to create a very cohesive mobile environment, but they have made it almost impossible for maintenance CMMS providers to provide good applications. So that is not something that we can currently support, because doing so would mean you getting a diminished experience, and we're not willing to diminish your experience because of what the operating system provider is not willing to do, if that makes sense. So we're not providing Windows support yet. We'll continue watching that, and if they change their ways, we'll definitely jump on that boat, but they're not quite there yet. All right, so with those two out of the way, let's talk about iOS and Android. Really cool stuff. If you get, say, our app on iOS and Android, you won't tell any difference between the two, but there's some kind of important differences between the two as it comes to the buyer persona in your case. So Android devices tend to be less expensive, so that's an interesting point. You can kind of save cost by going with Android. They do tend to be a little bit further progressed on technology. However, Android has not done a very good job of creating an intuitive environment. And we did a really neat kind of study of, actually involves who opens what via email. And we found out that people at home tend to, when they're opening up their email, even if they use Android at work, they'll open it up on an iPhone or an iPad at home. So people like using iOS devices. Android's a very practical choice, but people like using iOS devices. And the extra price tag, I think, comes from people's desire to use iOS devices. And I think I could be wrong, but I think there's a reason for that. And that's that iOS has, going back to BJ Fogg, like I said, BJ Fogg permeates everything. They've made it a little easier to do most things. So particularly in the case of technicians who, I think a lot of facilities have maintenance technicians who are maybe a little bit older, who, whatever reason, don't like technology. All of us, including us here at the Dude, we have what I call a technology curmudgeon, the guy who just hates technology and doesn't want to learn anything new. And we all love this person, and they're kind of grumpy and they're great fun. But those people, if they're going to use a device, they tend to get better success out of iOS devices. So that's a consideration. Now, which you all choose, totally up to you. In our case, we support both completely equally. You would be hard-pressed to tell the difference between the apps on each device, but that's just a practical choice on your part. But those are some of the considerations. The next consideration is which form factor you want to choose. So iPhone and tablet are the major ones, and we're going to have a polling question here after this, so be thinking. Tell you what, why don't we do the polling question, and then let's come back. So, all right, so let us know what you guys use at your facility to do maintenance, tablets or smartphones or none. So this is really interesting. So we got 10 nones and 5 smartphones. We'll give it a few more seconds, and then we'll skip to the results. And then I'm going to, if I could hug you all, I would. All right, cool. All right, so here's the results of that. Smartphones, nobody's using tablets. Very neat. Very, very neat. Okay, cool. All right, let me go back to this slide. So you guys have probably already, those of you who are using smartphones have probably already done what I'm about to describe. But for those of you who haven't, let me tell you a good way to approach this. So we did an interesting study, and we asked people, obviously not all of you, because you guys picked smartphones, and said, what do you use at work? And most people actually said tablets. And when we asked them why they wanted to use tablets, the administrators who purchased them said, I don't know, the technician said they wanted tablets. I said, okay, cool, let's talk to the technicians. And this was a valuable lesson. Always talk to the technicians. Always talk to people who are going to be actually living with the devices. You got to do that, and you guys have to do that. Talk to the people who are going to be using the devices and involve them in the process. So valuable lesson learned. So we went and talked to him. We said, okay, tablets. Why do you like to use tablets? No, we like to use tablets because we don't like reading the small fonts on a smartphone. Aha. So what you're saying is, if I were to make it so the font and the user interface was really consumable on a smartphone, you would, maybe consider using a smartphone. And the response was, paraphrasing, smartphone. Oh, well, if that was the case, forget the tablets. We don't want to use tablets because we leave them around and they get broken, they cost money, and then we already have to carry a phone anyway, so we'd much rather just carry a phone. So the reality of the situation is that most of our clients would prefer, the end users, would prefer to use a phone than a tablet. So we highly recommend purchasing phones instead of tablets, but mostly we recommend involving your users, the end users, in the decision, and especially the technology curmudgeon, which I mentioned before. That person will be instrumental. And I'll just touch on wearables real quick, and this is something that is coming down the pipe. Like I said, mobile is not about phones or tablets. It's about supporting people where they are with what they're doing on the spot. So wearables are starting to show really great promise in this. And so keep your eyes on this. It might not be in this 24 to 36 month hardware purchasing cycle, but maybe the next one, we might have some neat stuff to show around wearables. So watch that, because that's going to get interesting. All right. Now, so we get the devices, we've picked our operating system, we've picked our phones, and now we're going to secure them. Now maybe we've done BYOD, we've let people bring their own devices to work. Some of the stuff we've seen around BYOD is that they'll provide a little subsidy, they'll pay the data plan or something like that, but it generally saves companies a huge amount of money. So how do you secure these things? Well, you need a good secured Wi-Fi network. You don't want things leaking out over Wi-Fi, so make sure the devices are locked down on that Wi-Fi network, and make sure it's secure and that you have a password that's not like 1234 or anything like that. Talk to an IT person about getting a good Wi-Fi network to support your mobile distribution. But the neat thing is, if you haven't heard of it, it's called mobile device management. Mobile device management allows you to, not only with your own devices that you have purchased, it allows you to do BYOD, because you can install mobile management software on your employees' devices if they're going to be using them for work, and you can set restrictions on things like cameras. So I assume none of you want pictures taken of proprietary items being manufactured. You can set a restriction that shuts the camera off while they're in the facility. So cool stuff. So check out mobile device management as an option there for securing your devices. It makes it so that people can't engage in mischievous behavior while they're on their phone. So it really completely negates all those concerns that you have around, all right, well, how are people going to misbehave on mobile phones? Gets rid of all those concerns. So check that out. It's a really neat thing. All right, so just out of curiosity, do you let employees use their own devices? Even split. Alexander, next time we do this, we got to put money on these results.
Yeah, it's a great idea.
All right, even split. So anyway, I hope that was useful to you guys and your considerations. All right, so now, this is our last bit before we open up to more questions. So what are you looking for in a CMS system? So you want something that's technician-oriented. The people who are going to be using this, where the biggest labor expenditure takes place, is with technicians. So you want your system to be very well aligned for them. I know that pretty much everybody on the phone today is going to be what we call the buyer persona, the person who's making the purchases and doing the administration and all that. And so you're going to have really good tools, I think, no matter what CMMS you get. You obviously want something that has really good data integration and all that kind of stuff. However, from a mobile perspective, the people who are on their feet 24/7, they're the tech. So make sure that they're involved in the decision, that you run some of the options by them to see how they feel about it, because that will give you the best idea of what's going to really suit you. And you really want to look for something that's a mobile-first design. So a mobile-first design is something that is designed to be intuitive on a mobile device. It's not specifically avoid systems that have a desktop interface that has been shrunk down, where the font is really small and the hit areas are really small. It's it really, frankly, annoys me when CMS systems do that, because one of the things that we found in our user interface research is that because the maintenance technicians are so involved working with their hands that their hands are pretty calloused, and this is just a weird UI thing, that they physically, the calluses actually diminish their ability to hit small areas on the phone. It makes basically the touch area that the phone can detect much wider due to the callus. So if the interface has tiny little buttons, it becomes mechanically impossible for them to hit them. And if they're mechanically impossible to hit, where does that put it on the BJ Fogg chart? That puts it way to the left, where they have to be highly motivated in order to do it at all. So you really need something that's a mobile-first design, and you want something that's intuitive. So that's where you bring your computer curmudgeon in and have them take a look at it. If it passes the computer curmudgeon's sniff test, you know you picked a winner. So do that. Now, other things you want to look at in mobile solutions is the ability to have unlimited users and unlimited data. So the most important thing here, again, is with all the technicians, that you need to have good data entry. That means knowing who entered exactly what, when, and you want to be able to have everybody on the boat without incurring inordinate costs. Also, data is important, so you don't want unlimited data. You want somebody who can store as much as you can throw at it. And then second to last, I'd say excellent onshore support. So it's not, I might not throw this one up if I weren't talking to a bunch of manufacturing people. However, since you guys are in manufacturing, you really can't afford the frustration and time it takes to deal with support that's not 100%. So you need someone who you can call with whatever issue you have, and that they help you resolve your issue quickly so that you can get back to making things, because we all know the horror of downtime. So I would say really consider having evaluating the support that's provided as one of your major considerations. And lastly, cloud-based. So back to the very first slide, which is, you want to be, you only want to operate within your core competency. You guys are fantastic manufacturers and probably don't want to also be an IT infrastructure company. So in addition to the inordinate cost of the physical hardware, which can very comfortably push 7 figures, you have to pay the people to run that, and those people are at least 6 figures. So the cost of maintaining servers is huge, and fronting that yourself is a nightmare that you definitely don't want to get into, because you have to consider that you have to maintain something that is, firstly, has good uptime, that it's up all the time and up when you need it, that it is secured by people who are competent with computer security, because you have all seen the horrors that have been happening recently with corporate espionage, particularly from China and other places, where servers get hacked and all this kind of stuff. So securing a server is no lightweight task. You need people who really understand how to do that. And you go with a cloud provider. All of that's taken care of for you. You don't have to worry about any of it. Literally all you have to worry about is picking up a device and rolling. And you also, of course, get the benefits of the collective knowledge of everyone who contributes. And so that's the end of the presentation, and I'd like to go ahead and open up for questions, and Alexander is going to take over for that.
Yeah, Brooks, it looks like we've already gotten the first question
Sure.
asking about how about phablets? So I guess that's kind of like a Galaxy Note or an iPhone 6s Plus or something like that.
Yeah, I actually really like phablets. Again, I would say, ask your technicians what they like, but I know a lot of technicians do prefer a phablet even to a phone, because they can still clip it to their belt and roll and use it just like a phone. So that's a great question. So I think phablets are good, but use the litmus test of asking the technicians what they want to run.
Great, thank you, Brooks. Any other questions? Feel free to type them in the chat or the questions box. And otherwise, if we don't see anything else coming in, then I would say thank you so much for joining us today, Brooks.
It was my pleasure.
I really appreciated it, and I hope it added a lot of value to everyone here on the line today. It surely added value for me, and we'd we will send out a recording here either at the end of the day or tomorrow for you guys, so you guys can watch it again if you have any questions. Also, Brooks' email address is here on the screen, so if you want to ask Brooks a question directly, feel free to email him.
Please do.
And thanks again for joining us.
Thanks, y'all. Appreciate it. Oh, wait, question?
Oh, we did have a question.
But I haven't rolled to my employees yet. Okay, I currently use the Work Center app, but I haven't rolled to my employees yet. I don't see all the transactions available on the web. How do I input transactions other than time? So the Work Center app is being developed agilely, and the transactions are a feature that we are working on developing currently. So as new features roll out, you'll start seeing more of the features that you see in the web and the Work Center app. So the next thing that should be coming up fairly soon is actually the attachments feature, so you'll be able to capture almost everything with that very shortly. I hope that answers your question, John.
Yeah, and if it doesn't, then again, feel free to email Brooks directly.
Right, you can email me with your issues if you run into anything. Great.
Well, thanks everyone for joining us, and if there's nothing else, then we'll say thanks again and have a great day.
All right, take care, y'all.